So hopefully you can see uh, an image, a painting by Matisse called Dance, which I'm going to be reflecting on in a minute. And this is an image of a shepherd from William Blake, the artist and poet William Blake. So in trying to evoke Sangharakshita's image of the shepherd's round dance, I'd like you to imagine five of these shepherds dancing together in a circle. So let's see how we go. So this is the so in this series of talks, we're honoring Sangharakshita and we're honoring his founding of the Triratna order, and we're in that third of the four, what were called the four Brighton Lectures. He talked about Sangha, and he talked about the history of why he came to found Triratna. He and he how he felt that society in the West was ripe for this for what he had to offer, and something. It was a very, very significantly richer uh, expression of Buddhism, or expression of Sangha than had previously existed. Um, he had the idea of a Western Buddhism in uh, which was woven through with references to Western culture, so Western culture and art. So hopefully this talk will be an example of this of Sangharakshita's aspiration to make these connections between Buddhism and the threads in Western culture that that share the same aspirations. So let's see if I can. As usual, I've been very ambitious. Let's hope I can uh, get somewhere near that. So this is the two lines we're reflecting on today. My third gift is a shepherd's round dance. Do your feet know how to dance? And that's quite a question, isn't it? Do our feet know how to dance the dance of Sangha, the dance of Sangha and spiritual friendship? And and I would say that we probably don't know how to, our feet don't know the dance. It can be something we have to learn. We have to apply ourselves, sometimes over a whole lifetime, really, to this question of how we can live our social life and our relationships, our friendships, in a way in which in which they are an expression of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Uh, and so the question is, how can learn to become better dancers? What are the principles that guide the dance of Sangha? How can our Sangha dance become more graceful and coordinated and enjoyable? And obviously, there's so many questions in that question. Uh, it's you know you we could be here for a year of talks addressing that question, and I've got things that are personal enthusiasms for me. I studied Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication, found that absolutely wonderful. That really lifted my communication, my awareness of communication, my mindfulness of communication. I've been, I'm a passionate student of focusing with Varadi. I feel that's a beautiful Sangha building practice. Uh, I love the Brahmaviharas, expanding our metta practice to include the other Brahmaviharas, uh, karuna, compassion, mudita, appreciative joy, uh, upeksha, equanimity. But one of the things I want to say about this, and one of the things I think Sangharakshita is reaching for in this whimsical uh, shepherd's shepherd's round dance image, is that he's saying that Sangha and spiritual friendship is not something we can sort of create uh, necessarily by an effort of will. It's something that actually is involves a sort of surrender. Uh, and I find myself thinking that the Buddha Dharma Sangha are like a cascade of blessings, and Sangha is the domain in which the transcendental uh, comes into our social lives and our relationships. And it's also the place where it meets the resistance of the egoic mind's habits and all the habits of our social conditioning. So, the nucleus of a new society, this is the title that Sangharakshita gave to this third talk. And it just, at first, that seems, wow, that's a very ambitious theme. But what he's saying is that Sangha is so important. Sangha and spiritual friendship are so important to our society that, to the extent that a group of people uh, really live Sangha, really deeply understand what Sangha is and live that as a community, to that extent, that group of people become a source of inspiration, a source of uh, renewal for the wider community in which that group of practitioners are practicing. So that's really the aspiration that Sangharakshita was wanting to uh, leave with his students when he gave these talks 50 years ago. So I've got um, I've got some questions, and one of the questions I find myself wanting to ask is, um, well, there's two questions that it would be good to bear in mind as I give this talk. How is Sangha and spiritual friendship supporting our development? Uh, this is the third question, actually. How is Sangha and spiritual friendship supporting our development of individuality? This is such an important theme for Sangharakshita. He envisaged Sangha as a community of true individuals. And that's a really subtle and elusive idea. He didn't he didn't want people to surrender themselves to the group in a sort of in a sense of socially surrendering their autonomy and their individuality. But at the same time, he could see a need for a culture of surrender where people were surrendering themselves inwardly to the source of their individuality, surrendering themselves to their particular gift, uh, the gift that they were going to bring to Sangha. So let's have a look at this image. Um, so painted in, this is the first of two images. This was painted in 1909, before the First World War, an optimistic time in Europe, a wonderful time in Europe. Um, and and I would like to think that Matisse actually had some sort of an instinct for Sangha and spiritual friendship, and that he was putting it down in this painting. And this is the time you could say this particular painting is a sort of key represents a key turning point in art. It really takes us into the era of modern art. Um, Matisse was keenly aware that photography was taking over uh, the image. It was dominating people's, uh, uh, art. People weren't going to artists to get an image of themselves. And so the artist was stepping into the role of, this was Matisse's aspiration. He wanted to step into this role of saying something that a photographer couldn't say. And in that process, he completely abandons all attempt to be realistic and figurative. He's just using three colors plus black, and but he's expressing something so powerful with these three colors and these very simple, crude lines. And let's see what we can see in this image, thinking about it from the point of view of Sangha. So first, there's the nakedness. I mean, I think we can let go of the nakedness. It's a symbol of freedom. It's a symbol of being transparent, being authentic, being uncontrived. This is an image of five souls interacting together, you could say. Um, so how are they like members of a Sangha? Well, I would say there's a sense of togetherness there. I might even say there's a sense of egalitarian solidarity. At some sort of deep level, we're all in this together. We're all in this process of, what is it to be a human being? Asking that question and finding our way. And there's a question in this circle, is there anybody leading? And you wonder whether this figure over at the left is leading the dance. Perhaps he's a sort of a teacher, uh, and and the others as perhaps learners. The two at the back seem to be intensely self-aware, as if they're learning the dance. And there's a sort of introspective sort of quality that Matisse has managed to paint into their their faces. And so there's this so it's expressing, I would say, these needs, this sort of conflict or a sort of balance of needs in community. There's a need for autonomy, there's a need for individuality, but there's also a need for togetherness, connection. And this is somehow expressed in this image. And there's this, one of the things I love about this image is this break in the circle. I don't know if you can see that. And there's a sense that this image that's got her back to us is, she's falling forward. There's a sense that she's lost her grip, or perhaps the figure on the left has let go of her. There's a sense, in fact, I have all sorts of thoughts about this figure on the left. She seems so much more accomplished. There's a sort of confidence in her, in the steps of the dance that she's sort of mastered. But there's almost a sense that perhaps she's become unaware of this figure to the right of her and has let go of her. And so we could read all sorts of thoughts into sort of dramas into this group of images, group of characters. And people in New York, this painting's in the Metropolitan Museum of Modern Art in New York. People go and sit in front of this painting and just feel the quality of this, the the energy in this group of characters. It's like Matisse is a teacher for some people. He's saying something important about the the human condition. So there is this, particularly, I love this break in the circle because you could say, oh no, there's a break in the circle, but this, it's part of Matisse's genius that he made that break in the circle. That's, it makes the image much more like real life in which there is strain, there is misunderstanding, there is breaks in relationships, and a need to rebuild connections in relationships. So there's Matisse in his studio in Paris. And next we have William Blake, a very, very different man, but I think he shared this passion for sort of human flourishing through art and community. What's so distinctive about Blake as an artist and why Sangharakshita loved him so much is that his poetry is peppered with very Buddhist insights. He says, for instance, imagination is the real and eternal world of which this vegetable universe is but a faint shadow. And Blake also says, if a thing loves, it is infinite. And he also says, if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. So there's a very, very clear Buddhist sort of resonance in his writing. So I'm just going to flick through a few images from Blake. He had this particular unique style. He wrote poetry, he created plates, he etched plates, and then he illuminated those the printed images with color. So he probably only created 30 copies of each of these, and he presented them as collections of poems. So there's an image of a shepherd. I've had to cut down on these images. This one I particularly wanted to share. There's a few lines here that is so Buddhist. He's saying, to mercy, pity, peace, and love, all pray in their distress. And to these virtues of delight, return their thankfulness. So he's really talking about the Brahmaviharas. He's talking about loving kindness, compassion, equanimity, appreciative joy. But he's presenting a vision of a vision of the world, a vision of the universe in a sense, which is pervaded by these positive emotional qualities. He feels that the transcendental is visible to us in the human heart as positive emotion. And that's a very Buddhist way of thinking about things. So here's this beautiful shepherd poet again, who's holding a pipe. There was a line in Kamala Mai's poem that she shared from Sangharakshita last week. Lovely. There's a lovely where Sangharakshita is reflecting on these two sides of himself, the monk scholar and the poet mystic. And he says, the poet is the true sage, the sweetest poet, the piper, his own best tune, and laugh that I could ever have striven thus to sever the moonlight from the moon. So I would say Sangharakshita has an identification with this figure. of the shepherd poet piper. And it's almost like it's an image. Sangharakshita recognized it as an image of the Bodhisattva. This is the Bodhisattva for Blake, uh, uh, a person who is surrendered, lives in gentleness, the gentleness of the shepherd and the sheep, but he's surrendered. That figure that's floating above his head is the source of is the transcendental source of his inspiration that he's undertaking to be receptive to surrender to. So I'll just read this poem because it illustrates something that's so characteristic and so important about Blake and it illustrates why Sangharakshita would use this Blakean image of the shepherd's round dance and why he would sort of adopt this whole sort of Blakean style in the way he writes some of his poems. So I'll just read it. It's a contrast between, you could say, samsara and nirvana, or uh, see what you think. Love seeketh not itself to please, nor for itself hath any care, but for another gives its ease, and builds a heaven in hell's despair. So sang a little clod of clay, trodden with the cattle's feet, but a pebble of the brook warbled out these meters meet. Love seeketh only self to please, to bind another to its delight, joys in another's loss of ease, and builds a hell in heaven's despite. So this is very strong contrast. This is this is the contrast we see in the Buddha's teaching. He's saying that there is this, the consciousness is woven through with the Brahmaviharas, these positive emotions, but we are identified with the egoic mind, which has these terrible habits that creates a nightmare everywhere in our world. So this is the theme of innocence and experience. And that was one of the most important sort of foundational works of William Blake. I won't share, I can't share in detail about the songs of the songs of experience poems, but they're so brilliant. You know, Blake is like a sort of a Jungian analyst or something. He just sees the way the egoic mind destroys and distorts things, just like the Buddha did. He sees the injustice and inequality and suffering of London as he walks through London. He walks through London with this visionary sense of the potentiality for humanity, and yet sees the dark reality of human life. People might know The Tiger, which is a very well-known poem, but there's a couple of lines I could just read. Did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? So again, he's seeing, just as with the clod and the pebble, he saw the hard and the soft woven through nature. So again, in the lamb and the tiger, he's seeing the hard and the soft, innocence and experience as these. He's seeing evidence of this benign, transcendental. At the same time, he's seeing this sort of fallen world in which is so harsh. So back to Matisse. I love this. This is the sort of the final copy. He was painting this as a commission for a Russian merchant who was an art dealer uh, and patron, basically, and profoundly supported Matisse. And so this painting, the red one, hangs in the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg. So, and I feel they it beautifully, we've talked about it, it beautifully expresses this dynamic of individuality and community. And it's just putting them two side by side. There's something very poignant about the idea that the pink one ended up in New York, the red one was is in St. Petersburg. So all through the Cold War, these two paintings were at opposite sides of the Atlantic. And they're much loved paintings. They're loved by the people of America, and the red one is loved by the people of Russia. And and people sitting in front of these paintings, they um they respond to this the genius of Matisse, who was trying to evoke something about the human condition. And for me, it's so poignant to see these paintings together because we've gone through the Cold War process. We didn't have a nuclear war, and now Russia and America are at war again. And and it's not just a Cold War either; it's a hot war. So it's there's something sort of tragic and poignant about that. That's so incongruous with this beautiful imagery of human connection.